What is going on, everybody? I'm your host, Adam Pross, and I welcome you to another episode of the River Run podcast. And before I get my guest on tonight, Preston Chrisman, who is he works with the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, fisheries biologist. He's going to come on and we're going to sit down and talk about the Alabama bass and this invasion. He has spent a good chunk of his career coming to understand the behavior of these bass, why they become so aggressive in their invasive species to other watery, such as streams, rivers, you name it, lakes. But yeah, before we get Preston on, I just wanted to talk about one thing. I just want to give a big shout out to the River Run podcast on Spotify. We finally hit 500 streams and downloads. That probably doesn't seem like a huge number, but to me, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to each and every one of you. This podcast is like near and dear to my heart. It is a river. I'm river rat. Okay, so to me, this is just fun to sit down, talk with other people, like-minded anglers. Biologists, you name it, everybody from, Wade Clements at Yak Attack to, all geez, there's so many names, but I just wanted to say thank you to each and every one of you who takes the time to listen to it, and to all of my guests. Thank you for taking the time to come on and just, drop some knowledge nuggets, the awesome sauce of all of my guests. But yeah, seriously, a huge thank you. Another cool thing, the River Run podcast is like slowly kind of traveling across the big pond, and I can kind of see where I have listeners coming in. And like I've talked about maybe a couple episodes ago, I talked about Japan, and I was just kind of like taken away. But then, at the same time, I was like, this is super cool because Japan is like huge into bass fishing. And I had seen another country of Ireland. In Ireland, so if you're listening to the River Run podcast in Ireland, super cool. Welcome to the show. New listeners, new followers, everybody. Don't forget, when you check out the River Run podcast on Spotify, go and hit that follow. It just keeps it in the algorithm, and it lets you know when we got new episodes dropping, or you can listen to all the old ones that I have out there. But yeah, once again, thank you so much to everybody for taking the time to check out the River Run podcast and helping me get to 500 streams and downloads. Another thing I wanted to say, if you're a river rat like me, then you need to definitely check out, because you probably already heard of it, but I love smallmouth, and what better way to share your love for smallmouth than wear a smallmouth t-shirt, and especially one that says a river rat at cheganbrand.com. Check them out. Yeah, it's so much fun with all the cool designs that they have. It's like, I don't know, it's almost like there's two favorite brands of mine. One is Vans and the other one is the Achigan brand. So definitely check them out. The Kayak Adventure series just hit up the new River Revival. Super cool because, like, for one, I believe, if I stand correct, and I could be wrong, but the new river is considered to be one of the oldest rivers in the world. It's historic for its Appalachian scenery, rocky shoals, current seams, and it's world class smallmouth bass fishing. So it looks like to me, and from what I saw, the Kayak Adventure series has done it again. And so, if you're looking for an event this summer, go check them out. Kayakadventureseries.com. Kayak bass fishing competition, catch photo release, live standings, awards, seminars, demos, community. It's a festival style with the atmosphere centered around, obviously, like river fishing for like-minded anglers. So definitely a big shout out to the Kayak Adventure series. You guys looks like you have outdone yourself once again. But yeah, no. So further than, I think I covered all those bases there. Yeah, let's bring on my guest tonight. If if I could do this properly, because I seem to be having some technical difficulties. Preston, what is going on, man? How you doing tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. This is kind of cool, and I just wanted to kind of share this. Um, so I had been, I think I believe there was an episode with another great guest, aquatic biologist, and you had reached out in the comments, and you're like, "Hey, man, like, if you ever wanted to chat about Alabama bass," and it was kind of funny because I had kept seeing Alabama bass kind of come up. Um, I was like, yeah, we need to get him on the show. We need to sit down and talk about this. So, like, but before we dive into like Alabama bass, um, let's talk about you, fisheries biologist. Like, how did this all come about?
Well, it's funny in your intro. I grew up on the New River in Virginia, right there. I fished it growing up as a kid. That's where I learned how to fish a beetle spin, catching smallmouth and rock bass and stuff. And that place is near and dear to my heart. It is a truly tremendous smallmouth fishery. I've got my Achigan shirt on too, so I'm a smallie nut.
Woo! I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So moving down to South Carolina, you might expect that we don't really have smallmouth, but that's not true. They're not native to the state, but there's been ongoing stocking programs for a long time. So I do get to get my smallmouth fix here and there, and we do
Awesome.
kick out some big ones. But yeah, so I grew up in Virginia, raised by a tournament bass fisherman. I was addicted to it, and then that love of fishing just kind of turned into a love of fish. I went to Virginia Tech, majored in fishery science, so I can't do much else. And then got hired in 2015 to come down to South Carolina. Started pretty low on the totem pole, and now I've moved up to be I'm the regional coordinator for one of our 4 regions in the state.
Region 2, I believe that is.
Yep, Region 2. So that covers essentially we're right across the border from Charlotte. So right across below that, and we cover essentially from Charlotte to Myrtle Beach, more or less, all of those freshwater resources through there. And along the way, I also picked up an online master's degree from the University of Florida, which helped springboard the career further up as well. So.
Wow. Okay. So, when we sit down and talking bass here, 2 dudes talking smallmouth, talking Alabama bass, talking the love for fishing, like-minded anglers, both wearing Achigan brand t-shirts. This episode was meant to be. You know, I gotta ask, when you take, like, you take your passion for fishing and you turn it into a career, there has to be some sort of drive that really gets you there. And from what I've read and what I can see, this has almost sparked quite a passion for understanding the one and only Alabama bass. And
yeah,
like, how did that come about? Like, I'm really interested.
Well, I wish I knew nothing about the Alabama bass, but it has, as we'll get into more, but it has migrated with the help of humans. Its way into South Carolina and throughout much of the southeastern United States, and it's now unfortunately progressing its way northward. So, and it's one that it's caused a lot of problems, and yeah, we'll get into that, I'm sure, too. And so, yeah, I wish I didn't have to deal with it, but it's we can't avoid it at this point. So yeah, so it's impacting our smallmouth, our largemouth fisheries as well. We have a small one of the red eye bass species that they took and broke into 8 different ones or 7 different ones. We have one of those in South Carolina, the Bartram's bass, and it's facing a really dire future because of the Alabama bass being moved around.
So I think this is a great time to dive into this. Okay, so tell me, what exactly is the Alabama bass, and like how are they different from like a largemouth to like a smallmouth? Like, before going into, like, every other bass species, what makes the Alabama bass Alabama bass?
Yeah. So 99% of anglers still call them spotted bass or spots. They were considered a subspecies of the true spotted bass, which is Micropterus punctulatus. But then the Alabama bass was elevated to its own full species in 2008. And so now it is Micropterus hinshalii. It's native to the Mobile Basin, of course, in Alabama. And that's a lot of free flowing streams, smaller streams and stuff, some medium sized rivers, and it does really well. They're clear water. It's thrived in those locations. It's just a stream bass until folks started moving it around. So where it differs from a spotted bass, if you catch a spotted bass, a true spotted bass bigger than about 2 pounds, that's substantial. Whereas Alabama bass, we see lots of 3.5, 4 pound fish out in California. Anglers have moved them, and some of those kokanee salmon stocked lakes. That's where you've seen some world records broken about the mid 2010s, and they were catching 12 pound Alabama bass. They were again calling them spotted bass, but they're definitely how a true spotted bass cannot get anywhere near 12 pounds. I promise. So they are Alabama bass out there as well. So they've been moved coast to coast.
So obviously, when we talk about, on a fisheries biologist standpoint, like, this is kind of concerning that people are taking Alabama bass and transferring. But why is that concerning? Like, why can't I take a smallmouth and go put him over here? Why can't I take a largemouth, go put him? But why? Like, what? Like, and it probably sounds like a silly question, like, but why is this concerning?
So number one, it's illegal to do so. Stock any public body of water with a fish that was caught from somewhere else. But the reason anglers do like the Alabama bass, it's a popular fish. It's aggressive like a smallmouth. It fights hard like a smallmouth. They get big in some of their early invaded areas. They still get pretty big for a while, and then they start to kind of crowd themselves out and start stunting and slowly get smaller and smaller in most places. There's a few standouts like Lake Lanier in Georgia, where they were one of the first places where they were moved to. So when they get into a new body of water where they were not before, they kind of have, I call it 2 prongs of destruction. And one is kind of focused towards largemouth bass, and then the other one is pretty much every other black bass species. Oh, no. So the largemouth bass, particularly in reservoirs and particularly in clearer water reservoirs, they outcompete them super fast. Lake Norman, they had a great long-term data set and published a paper where they looked at before the Alabama bass first showed up, and then within 5 years, largemouth numbers down, Alabama bass numbers crossed, and it became like 95% Alabama bass. Largemouth did not ever bounce back. You can still catch largemouth in Lake Norman. You got to go certain places to increase your chances. And so we see that time and time again in every reservoir where these things have gotten, except a very few rare circumstances where they haven't taken over and just outcompeted largemouth. And the reason they're behaviorally, they're almost more like a striped bass. They like to be in groups, out in open water, chasing down pelagic bait fish, your threadfin shad, blueback herring in a lot of our lakes down here. They're chasing down those open water shad schools, and they're just better at it than largemouth. Largemouth aren't as good. Largemouth, in an ideal world, it's sitting in a stump or a bush or vegetation, and it's just waiting for something to come by, quick ambush. It does not do as well chasing down, free swimming bait fish. They were doing it before Alabama bass got into that lake, and but once they got in there, they're just better at it. They reproduce faster, so their numbers just start to take over, and the largemouth get pushed further and further to the fringes. So in most reservoirs where they've taken over, you have to go up into the riverine portion of the lake or way into the back of longer creek arms, places where you still have some more natural habitat, maybe some trees that have fallen, maybe some aquatic vegetation, water that might get a little bit more muddy after a smaller rain, things like that. Whereas Alabama bass, they thrive in that clearer water, kind of in the main lake basin, the larger creek arms. So if you started in the top of a river portion of a reservoir, and as you move down, it'll just get gradually more and more Alabamas and fewer largemouth.
Now, and that's crazy to think that, like, it's actually closer to being more like a striped bass. I wasn't expecting that. I was kind of maybe thinking the other way, but and that idea that they can be that far, out there, and And you made a great point. A largemouth he's going to sit and wait, where if you got fish that are willing to, a bass that's willing to go and chase down and obviously take the bait from another, everything else is going to change because you've begun to change that ecosystem drastically. And it's crazy to think that Alabama bass, it's sad to say, but to be spread out of their native range is slowly done by the humans. We've kind of created that problem. Now, is it like, would you say solely on that we're destroying other fisheries by putting in Alabama bass? This isn't like they're getting taken by herons and whatnot and dropped off along the way in another pond or stream or whatnot, but like that is crazy how detrimental one species of bass has on an entire ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah. And largemouth bass, to get kicked to the curb like that is pretty substantial, because largemouth bass as a species is a robust species. I mean, they're invasive in many places where they've been stocked in Japan and things like that. Like they're the problem. So for this fish to come in and just curb stomp them push them into the fringes of the reservoir it says a lot about their detriment to the largemouth population.
Yeah, because like when you think of, if you have a species that's willing to outcompete the native species there, and we're talking about bigger schools here, not just largemouth. That's wow. And now I'm going to ask a question here because I'm interested on this one is, how is this then the effects on a smallmouth fishery? Now we kind of understand the largemouth. Let's kind of take a moment and try and understand the smallmouth fishery and how that's affected.
It's so that's the second prong path of destruction that I was talking about, and to me, it's even more concerning. They don't necessarily outcompete smallmouth, and this applies to smallmouth. It applies to red eye bass, species of the various species. Pretty much anything except largemouth, this applies to. The true spotted bass, if they get into a place with those, but talking smallmouth in particular, because that's what I'm facing a lot in my region right now. They hybridize with them very readily. Their spawning habitat overlaps a lot more than Alabama and largemouth bass do. So you might see a largemouth Alabama hybrid here or there, but it's pretty rare. Whereas they are reproducing in the same areas as smallmouth and a lot of these other smaller, less widely distributed bass species.
Okay.
So they get in the same nests and they hybridize with them. So you get fish that are start to look funny, which is what we've seen time and time again when they get into these places. And over time, the Alabama bass genetics, their alleles are just more favored for like natural selection. So they might start as a 50-50 smallmouth Alabama, and that first generation can grow big. It can be super aggressive. That's what, if you ever hear people call a mean mouth, that's what that is. It's a smallmouth Alabama bass hybrid. They're just like ultra aggressive. That they do grow larger, but over time with successive generations, those Alabama bass alleles are just kind of more selected for. So then it goes to like a few generations later, you're stuck with fish that are like 78% Alabama bass, 20% smallmouth, and I've got pictures and pictures and pictures of weird looking fish that just like, I mean, it makes me sick to my stomach just knowing like what it might look, depending on the colors, and when you first look at it, it might look like a smallmouth, and then if you had it in a live well for a few minutes and the colors change, and then you're like, that's definitely not a smallmouth. So it's just it, and so they hybridize them out of existence. There are lakes in northern Georgia that had smallmouth, native smallmouth. Alabama bass were moved by anglers into those systems, and then within it's a little bit longer than kind of their takeover of largemouth, maybe more like 15, 20 years, but they have not caught a smallmouth in 20 years in some of those places. They breed them out of existence. So to me, that is much more concerning than their effects on largemouth, because you can still catch largemouth. You can go find them if you know where to look, places to look, baits to throw. They're still there. They'll persist in the system. Smallmouth is, at least in reservoirs, is a different story. We don't have as much history with rivers, but there's a river in my area that has been historically stocked since the 70s with smallmouth every single year. And again, stacks of pictures that I have and genetic analysis to back those up. Is so many hybrids. It might be to the point now where hybrids outnumber pure smallmouth. Based on some fishing trips that we do, based on some electrofishing we do on the river, like there's just so many.
Yes, electrofishing.
Yep. It's devastating.
And it's actually terrifying to hear this, because if you love smallmouth bass, it's crazy to think that one person could go and just wreck that for an entire generation. And its effects are felt for so long. And you can see why, at the same time, Alabama bass and smallmouth being in that same water column, in same water habitats, where you made a good point. Yeah, largemouth kind of can retreat. They can go somewhere else. Where you have two species who are like, and if you think about it, they're both kind of like apex predators at this point. They're battling with themselves, but the fact that like one's kind of spawning into the other. Mm-hmm. And meanmouth, I always wondered what that was. Like, I never, like, when I heard that, and I was like, oh, okay, like I've seen it in articles, meanmouth, and I'm like, is this just some sort of like, is this like some Southern style nickname for a bass? But yes. Meanmouth is an Alabama cross with a smallmouth meanmouth. That is like, wow.
Yeah, it's like it takes the aggressiveness from both and just like cranks it up a few notches. I mean, they're ultra aggressive. So, which again, some anglers are just like, oh, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and so those are the ones that probably keep moving this fish to further and further places.
But like, let's just kind of see this on an angler. Like, we're just here talking about smallmouth, and we're talking about Alabama bass. And we talk about, its characteristics as being like this really awesome fighting fish. I have never in my lifetime fought an Alabama bass. And, but somebody who has, is the excitement still like, like when you compare smallmouth to largemouth? Well, I would tell you that the best fish on the planet to catch is a smallmouth. And the fight is pound for pound the best. I would say catching a largemouth is like kind of like walking the dog, or the wet towel effect. That's like we just kind of bring him in and he's good to go. But for anglers, like that's really interesting that we're putting a species in to make this like super mean aggressive fighting, like almost like a super UFC fighter in a river, and he's going to come in pound for pound, and this is going to be the best fight. Not really understanding that what I've just done, I'm literally changing history on that river or that ecosystem.
Yeah, for forever. I mean, we're not going to be able to snap our fingers and get rid of these things. Like where they've been invaded and introduced to, unless they develop some kind of nanobot that can target certain things. I mean, we're not getting rid of these things. So, wow. And what's even like super scary to me, like you think with most invasive species it takes two to start a population, of at least two, a male and female. But if you're talking about hybrids, it can really only be one fish that you could move into a new system and then wreck that entire river, because they're going to tumble downstream every flood. They'll bump into a reservoir further downstream. You could theoretically ruin that entire fishery forever with polluting its genetics.
Like, and there you go. The genetics part is for biologists. This is your game right here. On an angler side, like I'm just like this bass. No, so long, Alabama bass. You need to get out. I don't want you to come and wreck my smallmouth fisheries. We talked about like its repercussions on like its native population, like affecting like what actually is from that range. The hybrid is this is really interesting that you're getting into this aspect of it, because when we talk about the genetics of a smallmouth and the genetics of the Alabama bass. Alabama has really strong genetics, but can a fishery recover from the hybrids? Like, can you actually recover? Like, is there a chance that, there is a moment in time that this, I don't want to say I guess reversible, like, can we do something? Will it recover, or is it,
I wish I had better news, but it has not yet anywhere. The only tool that we really have in our toolbox is to just flood the system with stocking smallmouth and just try to swamp them out over time. Mm-hmm. Smallmouth are notoriously difficult to raise in hatcheries. Not every state can do it. Maybe 1 out of every 4 or 5 years, you might just lose your entire year class just from one minor water quality. I don't know why they're so fragile in the hatchery system, but it's notoriously just one of the most difficult fish to deal with. Because I think part of it's not truly a warm water species. It's not truly a cold water. It's just in that middle, and it's kind of, it might be harder to get that dialed in just right. So that's theoretically one potential tool, but the amount of hatchery space you would need to be able to produce that many smallmouth year after year after year, I don't think that's realistic unless it's a super small body of water.
So what about this? What if we said that the best fish tacos you could ever have is with an Alabama bass, and we started a commercial, we launch it, and everybody's like, fish harvest, Alabama bass, here we come. Would that actually do it, or is like, and this might sound like a completely silly question, but fish harvest on that species right there, Alabama bass, outside of its native range?
Yes.
Is that something to be considered, or is that even a push that, is it within states, like how to?
Yeah, it's definitely a push. Personally, I don't think we could ever fish them completely out of a system, but it would not hurt to harvest as many Alabama bass outside of their native range as you are allowed to do under your state's given regulations. At the very least, like I said, once a few 10, 15 years into it, Alabama bass, their numbers get to the point where they start crowding and they start stunting and they get smaller and smaller. So if you really increase the harvest, I guess in kind of the silver lining, you could still thin those numbers out so there's more resources to go around. So maybe you can still keep producing larger Alabama bass longer than what we see. But as far as fishing out one of these major river systems or one of these big reservoirs, it's pretty unfeasible to get every last one. And like in my example of one of my lakes, it's just now it's flipped to where Alabama bass have now become the dominant over largemouth just in this year actually. It's downstream from Lake Norman, so even if I could snap my fingers and every Alabama bass disappeared, the next rain, it's going to tumble some over the dam of Lake Norman, and they'll end up right back at Lake Wylie. So you always have that. You have that you'd have to essentially wipe everything upstream of you as well.
Yeah, like and as on a state standpoint, you were talking about, for fish harvest, is Alabama, like for instance, if you wanted to harvest a smallmouth in the state of South Carolina, are you allowed to harvest more Alabama bass compared to harvesting other bass at this point?
Yes. Okay. Our limits for most bodies of water are higher. You can take more Alabama bass. I really like what North Carolina has done. They're able to react a little bit faster than us. They have removed all bag limits and size limits on Alabama bass. They also have native spotted bass, and which are very difficult to tell apart visually. So they took those away from spotted bass as well, knowing that, yeah, we might sacrifice our spotted bass, but if it helps reduce these Alabama bass, we're willing to make that sacrifice, just because even law enforcement officers, I don't think could distinguish if you had two of them side by side. So yeah, they kind of had to do both. So I like that approach. Here in South Carolina, to speak for us, we we do have those higher limits in most of our bodies of water. We are one of the last states in the country where our agency does not have the legal authority to change regulations. Our own, a law has to be introduced to our state House and Senate and passed, and so it's a lengthy, like 2-year process to get anything done, and then you're always nervous if you open up a regulation. A politician who thinks they know more than you that can throw in something, and then we just went through that with blue catfish in a very bad way. we had a regulations change, and it was only applying to one trophy fishery, and a politician said, well, let's just remove that only for that body of water and make it statewide. And so that upset a whole lot of stuff. We finally just got that rectified, like 5 years. It took 5 years or so. So we're always nervous to open those regulations when we do. So you need to have a lot of good buy-in before you do something like that. So yeah, you'd need to tell them why, let them know why we would want to do that, to open it up more.
Because the best fish tacos you could ever have in life are with the Alabama bass.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure we can push that movement. Maybe even get like Taco Bell on.
Now we're talking
on the. Why not? Okay, so when you talk about like Alabama bass and we're talking about fish behavior. We've spoken about like how aggressive they are as feeders, but their food web, them becoming hybrid, does that open up a bigger food web? You know what I mean? Like, is this make for fish that needs to eat even more? So like how does the food web change for Alabama bass?
So like I said, they really specialize in those open water bait fish, but also similar to smallmouth, they'll hammer crayfish pretty hard.
That's what I was wondering.
Yes. So if you don't find them in open water, your next highest likelihood of finding them is around whatever rocks you happen to have in your reservoir or river. They love a good rock pile. And so in our lakes here in South Carolina, which are heavily developed, 90% of our shorelines are riprap and boat docks, which they do very well on, and even better than largemouth. So especially with clearer water, so they'll chase their schools of bait fish out in open water, and then I guess when they get bored with that or full or whatever, they'll retreat to a dock or a bluff rock wall, especially is really good, or a riprap bank, something like that. Hang out, rest, and that's where most anglers will probably run into them unless you're really good with forward-facing sonar. You could probably chase those guys down in open water. But they really specialize in those open water bait fish species: blueback herring, striped fin shad, gizzard shad, all that stuff.
To me, just everything just about Alabama bass it screams like rivers getting devastated. You know what I mean? And you just talking about like the conditions for them to spread even faster, and you look at all these river systems and just, the conditions you talk about, it's scary to think like, wow, like how serious of a situation states have on their hands, and because of one species like that, and to turn it into a hybrid meanmouth is like, it's crazy. I'll be honest with you. I'm learning so much right now because I did not think it was like this devastating, and but I gotta ask you, as an angler and other anglers who listen, anybody, in anglers in all sorts of states, provinces, whatnot, your angler responsibility, it's huge. I think, conservation, we can give back to Mother Nature. But like how much, when you like, we're talking like even like the amount of the spread is linked to illegal fishing transfer. Yeah. That seems like it is like the number one culprit right now.
Yeah. What I always tell folks is I'm assuming it has largely been moved by tournament bass anglers on these reservoirs because it's so aggressive. It's also very highly predictable. So anglers that figure it out. Like they can pretty much just run the same series of boat docks tournament after tournament. They'll catch their 5 fish, and that'll make them happy. They're predictable. They're not as sensitive to weather front changes, whereas largemouth can be. Big cold front comes through. Their Alabama bass they're still going to bite pretty well. So I think that's why anglers have enjoyed them. It's reliable. They can catch their 5 fish and then maybe go chase a largemouth for find their kicker. So I guess I probably should talk about kind of their history of movement too.
Yeah.
So like I said, they're native to the Mobile Basin in Alabama. They kind of the first spot they were moved to is Lake Lanier in Georgia, which is one of those places that's different. They have not crowded out there. It's got a lot of blueback herring and it produces big Alabama bass even now, 40 or 50 years into their invasion of that one. And it's people go there and they have a blast catching them because at that lake in particular, you can catch them schooling on topwater all throughout middle of the day, all summer long. Like they'll just come up and they'll start force a big school of bait fish. And you can, if you're in the right spot at the right time, like so catching big 4, 5, 6 pound Alabama bass out there on topwater, I would enjoy that too. So
Bassmasters,
yeah,
any big tournament, I'm sure we've seen, where the guy's like, throwing a big spook and he's cranking that thing across the top, walking it, and you just see the boom, boom, and there's bait fish blowing up around. Like I remember that now. Yeah.
So anglers that travel there like, oh, this is great. So then they moved them to our reservoirs on the Georgia South Carolina border and on the Savannah River system. They kind of started up high in some of our smaller lakes, and then down to Lake Hartwell is one of the more well-known ones. Clark's Hill further down that, and in those systems they've just dominated. They've really taken well. Hartwell is a little bit different. It's still got pretty good largemouth fishing, but it's rare. Like some of the other ones, it's you catch 12-inch spotted bass or Alabama. Excuse me. See, even I trip up sometimes. Alabama bass just all day long, and you struggle to catch even a 15-inch one on some of those places. And that's well, I'll circle back to that. But so from there, the next big jump was to Lake Norman in North Carolina, and I think North Carolina biologists would agree with Lake Norman was known as the Dead Sea. Like bass fishing out there was horrible. So if you could have isolated Lake Norman in a vacuum, I think Alabama bass have probably improved the fishery there. They just had the red crest class, MLF red crest a couple of years ago, and I mean, so it's still driving popular interest. The problem is, you can't treat it in a vacuum, and they're made their way downstream, and now they're well into the same river system down into about midway through South Carolina. And then from Lake Norman, where people again is like, oh yeah, this made bass fishing great again. They've just radiated in all directions. They're eastern Tennessee, southern Tennessee, into the Tennessee River. They're in Lake Pickwick. There's some in Gunnersville. I think they're starting to see some in Kentucky Lake. All pretty much North Carolina entirely. I don't think they have a river basin that doesn't have them. We are pretty much at that same point now as they've come down the Catawba River and the PD River system from North Carolina. They're getting into most of our basins as well, which eventually those rivers lead to Lake Murray and to the Santee Cooper Lakes, which are world-renowned hot bass fisheries right now. And so they're not really in those yet. A few are showing up in Lake Murray, but that makes us awfully nervous. And then, pretty much all of North Carolina. Now Virginia's the newest kind of hot spot. They're in the New River, which pains me because that's where I grew up doing. The reservoir there is where they first got moved to. Clater Lake is a small reservoir on the river, is where they showed up first. They're in the James River, which is another world-renowned smallmouth fishery. I've heard, but I don't think it's been confirmed, that some might have been seen in the Potomac. So, oh wow, you're getting not too far from the Susquehanna, which is why I reached out to you. It's like these northern, it's the smallmouth addicts up north. They're like, hopefully this is where we can get this to stop and get
100%
band together and stop these things. Because if they get into the Susquehanna, and then they're not that far from, I hate to say it, Lake Erie. We don't know how far north these things can survive, which is scary. We have no idea if they could handle Lake Erie. Maybe they could, maybe they couldn't. They just caught a 9-pound one in Eugene, Oregon, so that's pretty far north. Obviously the climate's different over there, and the Pacific Northwest, but that's pretty far north, and that
That's
kind of shocked me.
crazy.
Yeah. And again, Oregon calls them spotted bass, but there's no way a spotted bass is that big. So it's definitely an Alabama bass that was probably moved from those California lakes up there. So they're advancing north. They're in the river below Dale Hollow Lake, which is where the world record smallmouth came from.
I was just going to ask.
They're not in the reservoir yet. I don't think, as the last update from talking with Tennessee biologists, but I think they're right there below it. They're just like name a southern trophy smallmouth fishery, and they're in there.
Indiana.
So not that far north. No, it kind of stops midway through Tennessee, and it's not made its way into West Virginia really yet. It will, because the New River flows north, so it probably will at some point. But kind of West Virginia, Maryland, as of right now, is kind of where they have not advanced to.
Wow.
So, but yeah, that's why I reached out. Is like just raise awareness, because
I love awareness, man.
It might be coming. You know, I don't wish it upon you, because Lord knows it's been horrible for us, but
we have to. But we've already confirmed that, you know, and I like anglers, you know, as being culprits here, caught red-handed.
Yeah.
Some, I don't know, maybe others just release bass tournaments. What do bass tournaments, like, you know, anglers want to get out there, chase some fish, you know, cash a check at the end of the day, go fishing with your buddy, your dad, whoever. Maybe not an intentional transfer into another fishery, but what are bass tournaments doing to be proactive about this, or do they don't really see it as an issue, because at the end of the day, people are still catching them? And
I think for the most part, it's the latter. The bass tournaments, you know, they're one of their big goals is to leave a lake and not have a whole bunch of dead fish floating around. So they want to get everything so that the community will have them come back. You know, they don't want to outstay their welcome. So release and release in good condition is usually their top priority. That being said, there are some we're hearing about some tournaments here and there where they're starting to have, like, you catch bring in your 5 biggest fish like usual, but if the regulations allow it, we'll also give a $200 gas gift card for whoever brings in the most Alabama bass, and then they fillet them out, and either they do a big fish fry or donate them to a local food bank. Yeah.
Awesome.
We're hearing about that. It's starting to become a little bit more popular, but it's not nearly enough to make much of an impact. But
you never know, but somebody listening to this might actually be inspired to do that with their local club. And your local club could be anything from a bass, like full-on bass boat tournament circuit, to even kayak anglers. I know you guys, you know, everybody's catch and release, but you know, if we can do something there, you know, spread the word, get creative. I think that's really cool. $200 gas card. Who wouldn't want a $200 gas card when you probably got to put over $200 in your truck or into your boat? So I think that's actually kind of a unique way of preventing without the obvious. Like, when we talk about this, prevention is, obviously don't go and break the law essentially and dump bass that are not native to that water system, to that state, and throw them in there because you think that you're going to create some super velociraptor, smallmouth, mean mouth. Yeah, that's horrible. I hope anybody listening to this, if you do witness something like this happening, do your due diligence. And what can they do if somebody witnesses, like, hey, I'm out there fishing and I'm like, oh, Alabama bass, you'd look pretty good in this river.
Yeah.
What can somebody do? Can you reach out to the DNR? Like,
Absolutely.
How does this work? Like, within like safe measure. I don't want anybody, don't attack this person, but what can you do?
Yeah. That exactly, like, it's illegal, but I would almost guarantee a game warden has probably never written a ticket for illegal stocking of fish, because they have to be there and see them do it. But if if you drive your boat in, you've got the fish in the live well from the lake down the road, and you see the game warden sitting there, you're not going to stop. You're going to turn around and go somewhere else. So the odds of them happening to be there at the exact time that person shows up, like it's so difficult. So if you see anything like that, please reach out to your local wildlife law enforcement agency with DNR for a lot of states, and let them know, get a license tag number and anything, because maybe if some big tickets start getting written, and maybe make some local news, maybe that'll help start to slow these things down.
100%. I think that obviously it's unfortunate that a lot of the times this happen, it probably happens, and people are very unaware of what's going on. Buddy's just putting back his 5 fish, and his 5 fish just happened to be, a couple Alabama mean mouths, and let's say 2 or 3 largemouth and a smallmouth, and you're just in a system that doesn't hold. I can definitely see where that gets, or maybe even at night people are deciding to stock their own river systems because they want to get that sweet fight of the mean mouth. Well, I think this would be a good question, actually. The biggest misconception anglers have about Alabama bass.
So what I think is why, another reason, like I said, they're super aggressive and predictable, but another reason that anglers have liked them so much is when they first get into a new system, they are growing pretty big and growing pretty fast. You get a lot of 3, 4, 5 pound fish. I'm shocked up several 4.5 pounders the other day below the Lake Wiley Dam. So they see that and they're like, oh, this is awesome. They're super aggressive. They get big. They're more aggressive than largemouth. They're easier to pattern and follow along. But then they don't see it. So then they want to bring them to their local reservoir, but they don't see it 15 years down the road when those fish have, and they start getting smaller and smaller and smaller in most places. Like I said, there's a few standouts. Lake Lanier is one of them. Lake Hartwell still produces lots of big fish, both largemouth and Alabama's. But those are the exception, not the rule. In most other places, it's like you got to weed through 50, sometimes 50, fish that are not keepers for your bass tournament before you finally catch one that's over your 12 or 14 inch minimum.
When we look at Alabama bass, like the big picture of this is what I'm hearing from our conversation, the way that I'm taking this is that this is probably one of the biggest threats to smallmouth fisheries
100%
across the states. And you've just spoken about, Oregon's, Pacific Northwest. It is an absolutely gorgeous state. I've been there many times. Been down to Portland. And I'll be honest with you, that's crazy to think that, that the Alabama bass has made its way that far into the Northwest, and obviously was transferred, going from, out of state. When you look at the fisheries that are currently affected by this, your highest risk right now, when we were just talking about that, like, showing up in the Potomac River, Maryland seems to be, I don't think the Susquehanna falls too far behind this. And when you look how far north Oregon is, and you look at how big the Susquehanna runs from its north branch, south branch, all the way, that borders almost southern. I believe it'd be like New York, even New York State there is right on that line too. Forgive me if I'm wrong there, but like I'm starting. That's kind of that, but like to think that Maryland is another one that is going to be could be affected by that, we're talking some high risk right now.
Yeah. Yes. It's speaking of the Potomac, I always like to say, everybody remembers the insane chaos when the northern snakehead was first found in the Potomac River, and all this, the horror movies and all that, and they're going to climb out of the water and eat your dog and eat your children and all that. And as we've learned now that they've been in there for a long time, they really haven't had that much impact. But fish like that have gotten all the publicity, whereas this thing has kind of flown under the radar. And Asian carp is another one. Their numbers are insane. They're jumping out of the rivers, but impacts that we have documented have been kind of hard to show. Like, are they really affecting things? This thing is affecting things. We've got it documented place after place after place, whether it's just with largemouth and they kick them to the curb, whether it's smallmouth or another bass species where they breed them out of existence, more or less. Like, this is probably one of the worst invasive species we have in freshwater systems in North America.
Well, let's just look at, hold on here. Listen to what Preston's saying. He is a fisheries biologist here, and from studying the waters, understanding the impact, but seeing it on not seeing the data to go out there. Yeah. Going out there and talking about this, going out there and learning it from its, from where this has, its origin to where it has literally come out, and getting further and further north. When you talk about the snakehead, when you talk about, cat, well, even Asian carp are like everywhere.
Yeah.
But you don't hear about the Asian carp breeding with the smallmouth and then turning on the smallmouth. You don't hear about the snakeheads eating the good old smallmouth and devastating effects on its hybrid. Could you imagine a snakehead smallmouth hybrid? That'd be a little weird.
That'd be a fun frog bite, I think.
Like ugly toad.
Yeah.
Mean toad, I'd call it.
There you go.
But these are the lessons he has learned. Preston, you have learned this. You and your whole team and other biologists, and that's from all different states. If I could get this episode to as many people that I could, and I will, and anything that I can help push that you put out there with the Alabama bass, and this is because it's not going to be too much longer, and who knows? Nobody knows how far north they can go and what they can handle. Yeah. Now, the further north you go, the cooler it gets, right? So, will this genetically work? I don't know. Yeah. Can they sustain how far north could they end up in the St. Lawrence River? Come on here. You know what I mean? That's
what's scary. We have no idea.
Great Lakes affected,
Right.
So if anglers only understood one thing about Alabama bass, what should it be?
Even just broader, just do not move fish. If you could take away anything from this, do not move fish. It can have consequences beyond your comprehension. I know I work for a state agency. We are not blameless in our history. We've done a lot of poorly made decisions of stocking and introducing other species. But now we've learned, and so whenever we do a stocking, there's a lot of thought, a lot of studies, a lot of research and everything to know, you kind of figure out what those impacts would be before we did anything like that. So you moving an Alabama bass, flathead catfish, blue catfish, anything, even a largemouth from one system to another could carry diseases. It could carry parasites that those didn't have. The largemouth bass virus spreads probably that way. So even if it's the same species, don't move it. And even if you fish live bait, don't dump your bait bucket at the end of the day into the water, which most people do. You just dump them on the bank, throw them in the trash, anything, because you never know what you're going to introduce, whether it's a species or a parasite, disease, anything like that. So yeah, please don't move fish. It's just like the all the stop aquatic hitchhikers programs, to stop the spread of invasive plants. Like, it's the exact same thing. You throw a fish in one body of water where it wasn't before, you have no idea what could happen.
Preston, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on the River Run podcast. My guest is Preston Chrisman. He is the fisheries biologist with the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, and this is why Alabama bass have become one of the hot ticket items, not just in the angler fishing system, but is what is sadly taking over smallmouth, is greatly affecting smallmouth, which we've learned now is the mean mouth. No, thank you so much. And whatever you can do out there to help Preston out, whether it's, getting down with your local DNR, talking with, wildlife fisheries, just sitting down, seeing what you can do in your state. And if you happen to witness this sadly happening where Alabama bass are being introduced into a system that is not native to it, Preston is given some great tips on how to handle that. And yeah, like this has definitely been a great episode on sadly not a very great outcome topic wise. I like the idea of Alabama bass. I thought this is really, but like it's invasive. It's just its behavior and its devastation on rivers, streams of its not native range that's quite sad to hear.
Yeah, I guess one more thing that I didn't even mention, or it's like that. Not only is it hybridizing with smallmouth and breeding them, out of existence in those specific water bodies, but it's got at least one species of bass on the verge of potential extinction, if not, maybe not, but endangered species listing potentially. Wow. That's our Bartram's bass, which is one of those red-eye bass species native to the Savannah River Basin. They hybridized the hell out of them in the reservoirs, Lake Hartwell and everything. And so now, where you can really go to find pure Bartrams, you'll see a lot of hybrids between the two, still catching them in the big lakes and everything. But where to go find pure Bartram's bass, most of the time, you have to go up into the smaller tributary streams of those Savannah River lakes. And so you'll see, they've done, Clemson University's done a lot of great studies on this, and you'll see hybrids and kind of gets less and less and more Bartrams as you go up the stream. And then you'll run into like a barrier of some sort, whether that's an old mill dam or a culvert that's too high, and you'll have pure Bartrams above that.
Wow.
So that barrier is the only thing, maybe potentially keeping that stream pure. And if whether it's something happened, a big flood, gave them enough water they could swim over, or just an angler catches one on one side of the culvert and just pitches. And like I said, it only takes one when you're talking about hybrids, just throws it in on the other side of the, like that. I mean, that's terrifying. They're getting pushed further and further to the fringes. And so and that is only because before those were introduced, they were still doing great. People would catch them in the lakes. It's one of the few red-eye bass species that did well in reservoirs. So that, they were catching largemouth and Bartrams and having a great time. And then, now it's a lot of hybrids. You'll still catch hybrids in the lakes, but to find pure ones, you gotta know where to look.
If people want to get in contact with you, Preston, in regards to Alabama bass and it's invading their state or their local streams and creeks and whatnot, how can people get in contact with you?
So email is probably one of the best ways, and so that's my work email is chrismanp@dnr.sc.gov. So that's chrismanp@dnr.sc.gov. I'm also on Instagram. I like posting fish pictures when I can, when the kids give me a break, and that is at Hokey Fish Biologist.
Yeah, so I'll make sure to link everything down below in the description, and it'll be there for all those who want to reach out. Till the next time, thank you so much for coming on the River Run podcast. I'm your host, Adam Pross. This is Alabama Bass Invasion, and my guest is Preston Chrisman from the South Carolina Department of Fisheries. Thank you so much for coming on, Preston. I really appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. Happy to. Well, not the topic is bad and it depresses me greatly, but I appreciate and I'm happy to come on anytime in the future.
Awesome. I can't wait till the next one. Till the next time, this is the River Run Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Paddle and Fin Podcast Network. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget, for future shows, like, follow, share, and hit that subscribe button. Make sure you check out our individual channels and accounts too. Want to be a guest on one of our shows and talk of adventures, gear, or products? Contact us. Thank you for watching The Noob Show with Matt Gibson, Chasing the Tide with Dustin Nichols, The Rusty Hook with John Rapp, The River Run with Adam Fraser Pross, May Contain Fishing with Daniel Woodcock, Chasing the 20s with Carlisle Esterly and Sean Lavery, Friday Night Bites with Brian Schiller. Thanks for tuning into the Paddle and Fin Network. Subscribe and